This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत, झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत FM.
बजेगा भारत, झूमेगा भारत.
Namaskar, Sat Sri Akal, welcome and adab. You are listening to Bharat FM, a one-of-its-kind, multilingual, eclectic provider of entertainment, information and news to Indian Americans. Headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio, Bharat FM airs shows out of Cincinnati, Chicago and Phoenix. We take pleasure in our ability to cater to your bhakti, chusti, sphurti, shakti and masti needs with our audio and visual shows. Check out bharatfm.com for our online program schedule and archives. I'm sure the content will definitely tickle your senses. Tune in via the 24-hour web streaming on bharatfm.com or via the Bharat FM app. More information can be procured at 513-488-5070.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Storytellers Cafe. I'm your host, Usha Venkatraman. Good evening, Mumbai, India, especially to Bangalore, as my guest tonight is from Bangalore. And good morning, good day to everybody in the United States, especially Cincinnati, Phoenix, and Chicago. A very good day to all the viewers. And I know the pandemic there seems to be a resurgence. So stay safe, my friends, be masked, maintain social distancing, and wash your hands. Enjoy listening to Storytellers Cafe. Our guest for tonight is again somebody special. She's an author. This month seems to be an author's month, April. We had last week Katie Bugley, and this week we have another author in our studios. So authors are original storytellers, if you ask me, because for a storyteller, you have to pick up an author's book, and that's how you tell your stories. Of course, some stories are orally carried down the tradition, and you've heard them and you retell them. But most of the stories you find in a storybook. So my guest for tonight is Menaka Raman. Let me get Menaka onto the stage. Welcome, Menaka.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yes, let me introduce you to my audience. Today, Menaka Raman is going to talk about what it is to be a children's author. Is there a magic elixir? You can find out more and answers and a lot more from Menaka today. Menaka is the author of 9 picture books for children, 2 short stories, and 1 young adult novel called Loki Takes Guard. We're going to talk to her about picture books, short stories, and young adult novel. She is a former advertising copywriter, on and off parenting columnist, and currently manages digital communications for a podcast production company. When Menaka is not ignoring writing deadlines, she's reading anything she can get her hands on. We'll find out more as to what she is reading right now. You can follow Menaka on her Instagram, Mothership80. Yes, @Mothership80, and on Twitter and Facebook @Menaka Raman. So Menaka, welcome to Storytellers Cafe. I'm wanting to get hold of you and meet you, albeit we are meeting virtually. I've known Menaka for about close to 8-9 years when she was in Mumbai, but never got to meet her face to face. Welcome to Storytellers Cafe.
Thank you so much for having me, Usha. And yes, I wish we'd had a chance to meet in Bombay when I was living there. And who knows, one day in the future, once we're all vaccinated and it's safe for us to move about and meet each other. I hope we do get to do that.
Yes. So, Menka, can you tell us about your story, your journey into? I remember you talking about you were living in London for quite a few years. I've seen you writing columns for Hindu, the National Daily Hindu, and also in other newspapers and I guess magazines. How did this journey into storytelling? I know that you worked with Pratham for some time. Tell us all about it.
Oh gosh, okay. That's a question that's going to have me rambling. So feel free to cut in and say, Menaka, enough details. Okay, so where should I start? So I've always been a big, storyteller as a child. You know how most parents, when they have guests come over, will bring their son or daughter into the room and say, recite a poem or tell uncle and auntie a story and things like that. My parents never had to, kind of coax or cajole me to do that. When we had friends come over for dinner as a child, my most favorite thing to do would be to recite Roald Dahl poems, specifically revolting rhymes to our guests, to our poor beleaguered guests, because of course no one wants to hear revolting rhymes right before they sit down to dinner. So I suppose I've always been a bit of a performer in that sense. I've always loved reading throughout school and college. And that's always been a really huge part of my life. But I think somewhere along the lines, I finished my schooling in Madras, and in Madras in the 90s, there was this huge thing that everyone should become software professionals and do computer science or become engineers. And even though I don't think I felt any real passion for the sciences or for maths, I ended up doing that. I kind of just went with the flow. All my friends were studying science at the time. And then I ended up studying computer science in college. I did my BSc. But I think I realized, Dushan, I've said this to you before, I think in about my first week or second week in college, I realized that this is not something I can do for the rest of my life. I had literally no talent or skill for writing code or for programming. I just didn't have the logic that was required for it. So, somehow or the other, I managed to finish college and pass out of college and get a degree. And when I was done with college, I was wondering, what did I want to do next? I knew I didn't want to pursue computers in any way. I wasn't really serious about trying to do an MBA or anything either. And at that time, we had a really good family friend who knew that throughout college and school, I was always on the debate team. I used to love participating in things like Just a Minute and Whose Line Is It Anyway? I was a quizzer. And, she came and said, well, why don't you try advertising? Advertising takes rejects from all streams of, of studies and education and society. So why don't you go and try becoming a copywriter? So I think I went, I didn't even know which advertising agencies there were. And, this was when we still had phone books and you would still get a phone book home. And I think I went and opened the phone book and looked at advertising agencies in Madras. And there was, of course, I came across Ogilvy and Mehta, and there was Lowlintas at that time. So for Ogilvy, I said, okay, chalo, I'll write an email to Ogilvy and see what happens. So I wrote an email, or I think I sent them my resume, and then I called and said, can I come in? And I went in and took a copywriting test, and I was hired by my very first boss, Suguna Swami, to be a copywriter. So that's really how I ended up getting into that form of creative writing and using it, in my work. So I spent a few years as a copywriter in Chennai, and then in Bombay, I worked for Enterprise Nexus under Mr. Mohammed Khan. And then we moved to London, like you said. So we spent 6 years in London. And at that time, I did advertising as well for a couple of agencies over there. But I also started blogging because blogs had just kind of become this really big thing. This was I think 2003, 2004. And I started blogging. I had my first blog, which was called My Other Shoes Are Manolos. And I started everything from, living in London to short stories and short fiction and things like that. And that, had experienced some moderate success, that blog. And it was through that blog that I then got my first chance to write for Sushila Ravindranath at the Indian Express at that time. She had read a blog post of mine about trying to find coconuts and flowers to perform Varalakshmi Nomba in Northwest London. And she really enjoyed that. So she invited me to start writing about my experiences in London at that time. So that's really how I got into the whole, into that whole kind of writing for newspapers, writing columns at that time.
Wonderful, wonderful. That was your genesis of Menaka Raman as a blogger, as a columnist, and then eventually a writer. Menaka, tell me, as a writer, you have to have original content, right? And author is the originator or a creator of any written work, such as a book or a play, is also considered a writer. More broadly defined, this I'm quoting unquote, the person who originated or gave existence to anything, right? So an author gives existence to something, which is a story. So, how did this natural progression? You're already playing with words, working with words. How did that transition take place?
So I think really the idea of it was when I started doing a parenting column. So I think all till I started writing a regular parenting column, first with Indian Express, and then I've moved to a few papers with it over the years. Till then it's always you're pitching ideas, right? So I used to do a lot of culture stories initially for the Express. I used to write about art exhibitions, or I used to write about the Gay Pride Parade and things like that. And really, then you're pitching an idea. Hey, this is happening. I'd like to go and cover it and write about it. So while I was doing this, I took a creative writing course at Central St. Martin's College in London. And we would be given these assignments. You'd be given words and told to write a story. So I think that kind of got me a little bit more into, being given a really, two words and say, write a story, an original story out of it. So that was one part of it. But I really think it was the column, the discipline of having to write a weekly column about parenting. And kind of trying to find experiences in of what you're going through, and then try and make it something that's universally relatable to other parents at the same time. And I've always wanted my parenting column, or tried to make my parenting column funny, to try and see the humor in a lot of the difficulty of raising young children. So I think that for me was really, that gave me a lot of discipline, that every week I have a deadline. I have to find something to write about. And that really and then you're looking for stories in your own life or around, or you make something up, whatever it is. But that gave me a lot of discipline, and then, okay, writing on a regular basis.
Great. Wonderful. So that's how you began then I think you moved to Mumbai, and then eventually to Bangalore, where you're settled.
That's right. That's right.
Boys and a dog, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. I do see them on Instagram when you do write about. So this is lovely. So tell me, Menaka, how did the transition to getting your books either digitalized or print copy, I guess with Pratham, the picture books?
That's right. That's right.
How did that come about?
Right. So I had joined, we moved to Bangalore in 2014, I think. That's when 2015, we moved to Bangalore. And I joined Pratham Books, about a year later. And I joined as Story Weaver team. So where was I? So yes, we had Bijal Vachirajani join Pratham Books as a commissioning editor at that time. And she said, "Don't you write something for me? She said, you're funny, you have a good voice, and try writing something for children." So I wrote a picture book called Amma, There's a Bat in My Sambar, which was in rhyme. And it was about a bat who kind of flies into someone's house and is whizzing around the room. And it's the child's reaction to that. So that really was my first picture book. And from there onwards, I was very lucky to be asked by Pratham Books to write a number of other books. And across subjects, I've written this very fun, I'm going to show you the cover. I've written this very fun and whimsical story called Lenin's Guests, which is kind of brings in concepts of, little bit of math and about volume and liquids and stuff like that, but in a really fun and kind of quirky way. I wrote a book called Gapukan Dance, which is about a girl who who can't dance but thinks that she can. And then there was a book about self-love and, loving yourself in the way that you look, called I Love Me. I've written about children's rights. I've written about what microbiologists do. So really a broad range of topics. And very often these are kind of in discussion with, I'll have editors approach me and say, hey, would you be interested in writing something, about one of these topics? And then it takes on its own life from there.
How lucky for you, Menka. Editors coming and asking you. Now that's every writer's, author's delight, isn't it? That's wonderful. So Menka has nine
Absolutely.
picture books for children. I think four of them are digitalized copies and five are in print. One is going to come out now.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. How did you get into short stories and then now young adult book? Was that a natural progression?
Short stories are, I think, so I think that the hardest thing to write is children's books. I think writing picture books is really difficult because very often you have a word limit to stick to. Sometimes you're told for very young readers, like for really, really small children, usually it's like you have 150 words to tell an entire story, right? So you have to have the story arc, you have to have the beginning, middle, and the end. You have to have engaging characters. All of that in 150 words is very difficult. So I think writing picture books for children is really difficult. And I think the next hardest thing to do is to write short stories. I think it's an entirely different craft and discipline required to be able to do that. So the short stories that I've written, again, I'm really lucky. I have been approached by commissioning editors who are putting anthologies together and who have read my picture books or who have read my columns and who have heard of me as a writer and read my work and then asked me to kind of come and contribute to their anthologies. So I actually have I have one story which came out with Talking Cub, which is a speaking tiger imprint. It's a children's book imprint. And they did an entire book of stories on exam stories, crazy exam stories. And this came out a few years ago. So I had a lot of fun with that. It's about a girl who has a gorilla suddenly appear in the middle of her writing an exam. And you can see that gorilla over there on the cover. I then shared a story for a scholastic anthology, which was about, grandparents' tales. And I was asked, do you have a story that your grandmother or grandfather would tell you when you were a child? And would you like to kind of reshare that with us? So I got to share that with them. And this is one of the most recent short stories I've done, Usha. I was approached by Meera Iyer at Intac, which is a fantastic organization that works in India to preserve culture and heritage. And Meera was commissioning an anthology of short stories about Bangalore. And her brief, and she reached out to me and said, would you like to contribute to this anthology? And the brief was that the story has to have some connection to Bangalore's history. And it can be about, any point of time in Bangalore's history. It can be connected to a historical moment, a monument, a neighborhood, but it has to have a Bangalore connection. And it was really funny because when she asked me, Menaka, do you want to write about this? And I knew I knew who the other authors were that she'd approached for the anthology. And I said, but Meera, first of all, I've only lived in Bangalore for 5 years now. So I don't know if I should be contributing to this anthology. And I said, the second thing is I live in Whitefield. Now, Whitefield is a suburb of Bangalore, which has become very kind of populated and popular because of the IT parks and IT kind of companies that have set up over here. And I said, I can only write about Whitefield. I don't know anything about Banshankari or Malleshwaram or, Cubbon Park or any of those things for me to be able to feel that I can write about them. So she said, please write about Whitefield, because I don't think any of the other authors want to write about Whitefield, and it would be wonderful if you could. So I wrote a story for this anthology, which is called 11 Stops to the Present, Stories of Bengaluru, which is about a young girl very much in the present who's moved to Whitefield from America, because Whitefield has a huge kind of floating population of IT professionals who come to the city for a few years to do a project and then move back. And then, they come with their children, and all their kids go to these international schools. So it's about a girl who's been uprooted from her life in America and, is attending an international school in Whitefield, and basically how she time travels to the Whitefield of 1857 and kind of her experiences over there. And she meets another young girl there called Alice. So that was a lot of fun, and it took a lot of research. It was the first time that I was writing something that had a historical angle to it. So I was very nervous about that because I wanted to make sure I got all my historical facts correct, the details right about the setting and the houses. And in that way, I think that's where great commissioning editors come in, because Meera was fantastic. When she read the draft of my story, she then sent me more books to read, more articles to read. She sent me pictures of houses and said, this is what a house would have been like at that point of time. And it was absolutely wonderful. And we had a great editor called Vrinda Baliga, who also edited the book. So I think that's where, at the end of it, I felt very confident. I felt very nervous writing the story, but I'm very happy with how it's turned out.
That's wonderful. That's really wonderful. So please go out and buy Menaka's book. Can you show that cover again, the book for all the viewers and listeners? So there you go, Menaka Raman, who's written about Whitefield. And Whitefield about a century ago, Menaka? What was Whitefield about hundreds of years back?
Exactly.
Right. Wonderful. And then what, how was your not transgression, that's a wrong word. How did you transfer to writing Loki, for young adults? So what is the difference between, say, a short story for children or young adults? I guess the short story is also for young adults, right?
So, the short story, I think, is middle grade fiction, possibly. So, there is, I think, just kind of for trade reasons and things like that, books are categorized. You have picture books, then you have what are called chapter books, which are for, children who are a little too old for picture books now, maybe feel they've outgrown it, can read independently, and want to be seen as kind of reading, something a little more grown up. So if I can think of examples of, so you have chapter books, and those are usually for maybe an 7 to 9 age group. So Duckbill Publishers does some lovely books for that age group, which are these really nice, they're about 5,000 words long. The language is of a certain kind. It's, it's got a nice mix of language that the readers can easily eat themselves. And, those kind of words that then they need to go and ask someone, what does this mean? And expands their vocabulary as well. And they're fun, lovely stories. Then middle grade fiction is typically for children in that age group of 10 to, say, 12 or 13. Slightly more longer, slightly more complex storylines, also kind of tackling topics which are of interest to children in that age group. And young adult tends to be for this 13 plus. So there's sometimes a little bit of, teen romance and growing pains and coming of age stories and things like that. So that's kind of how I think the trade kind of categorizes it. But I think this book is perfect for like a 10 plus category, children who are what is called advanced readers, I suppose, but children who read a lot and who love reading, I think will enjoy this. So 10 plus is fine for that. But this is Loki Takes Guard. Yes, it's like a 12 and above, 12, 13 and above. But I've had 10-year-olds also read the book and, write to me and say we really enjoyed the book. So I think it's all down to the reader at the end of the day and what they enjoy. So how Loki came about was, like I said, I'd been working at Pratham Books with the Story Weaver team. I'd written a number of picture books for them. And I kind of knew that I wanted to write something, either a chapter book or a middle grade book, something a little longer. I wanted to write a longer piece of fiction. And the idea, and I'd had a number of ideas which I was kind of kicking around. The idea for Loki came actually from an incident at a bus stop in our building. So every morning, I would, drop them off at the bus. And this one morning I saw a book. So Dishita did, and she had this math. It was really interesting because there was,
we lost you there, Menaka. We lost connection. Couldn't hear what you were saying about how Loki originated, took shape.
Sure.
So if you can just repeat that and then read an excerpt from the book, we would love to hear that. Yes.
Okay. So Loki, So I'd written a number of picture books for Pratham Books, and I knew at that point that I wanted to try my hand at writing something for a middle grade, for basically this like 11 plus kind of age group. I think that interest also came from the fact that my older son was around 11 at the time. He was about 10 or 11. So I wanted to write something, for that age group. So the idea for Loki came actually one morning. I was at the bus stop dropping my sons off, for them to catch the bus to go to school. And there were all these kids milling around with their bags. And I saw a girl at the bus stop called Dishita Bajaj. And Dishita had this massive cricket kit with her, and I'd never seen a girl in my building or in our community where we lived with a cricket kit before. There were lots of girls who loved tennis and swimming and who were very, into athletics or played for school football teams. Basketball, all of that. But this was the first time I was seeing a girl with this massive cricket kit. So I said, Dishita, are you joining the school team? And she said, yeah, I'm going to start after school training with the school team. And she was so excited. And I remember thinking, and it was an all boys cricket team because cricket is still very much in many schools. I won't say in all, but in many schools, cricket is still very much a boys sport, while other sports enjoy an equal participation from boys and girls. Cricket tends to still be a very boys-dominated sport. So I just remembered that stuck with me, the idea of a lone girl on an all-boys cricket team and wondering what that would be like. So that was really the starting point for the idea of Loki. And Loki is basically, just to tell you a little bit about the book, it's about an 11-year-old girl in Madras. Her name is Lokanayaki. She hates her name. So she insists that everybody calls her Loki because Lokanayaki is, of course, a terribly uncool name to have. And Loki loves cricket. She's like completely cricket crazy. And all she wants to do is play cricket. And she basically is kind of part of her local, team called the Temple Street Tankers. And she's allowed to play for them but till she turns 11. And suddenly, the team is like, you can't play anymore. You're a girl and we have an all boys rule. And, we don't want you on this team anymore. And they quote some archaic rule in law and they chuck her off the team. And she's feeling really sore about it. And she's kind of annoyed and irritated, but she's also like, okay, but what am I going to do about this? These are the rules and there's nothing I can do. And she has this neighbor called Malati Akka who kind of tells her, why don't you start a petition, Loki, and get people to sign your petition so that, you can, and once you have so many signatures, you can go and show the team and they'll have to let you play. And so, of course, Loki manages to get, I think, 10 or 15 signatures for her petition. But also what interestingly happens around the same time is that somebody takes this petition and puts it online on one of those change.org websites. And her petition goes viral. And suddenly she has hundreds of thousands of people signing her petition. And, she kind of becomes popular and a little bit notorious even when she doesn't want to. And it's about all the things that happen as a result of that. So what happens when a certain situation you're in kind of your control in that situation is taken away from you? What happens to your friendships? How do you feel about it? How do you kind of take control of that narrative again for yourself? And that's what the book is about.
Sounds interesting, Menaka. Would you like to read something for our viewers from Loki, from your latest book?
Okay, I would love to do that. Okay. So this is the book, Loki Takes Guard. I'd just like to point out the fantastic cover illustration by Ekta Bharti, who's kind of totally nailed Loki and just kind of her neighborhood and what that's like. So this is from very early on in the book. It's from chapter 2. So I'm going to read a bit. To the untrained eye, it may have looked like I was hiding behind the raggedy palm tree at the boundary of the playground. But I wasn't. Okay, maybe I was, just a little bit. The national squad was on its way to an epic loss, which meant the third cross street, which had been empty an hour ago, was now back to its usual busy self. Everyone had decided they were better off going out and about, doing what needed to be done, than sit at home and watch India lose. The Temple Street Tankers had turned up for practice and obviously preferred to get humiliated by Coach Amir than watch the squad humiliated. I'd eaten plenty of bananas and stood the whole time, but it clearly hadn't helped. So I'd scratched those two off my list of things to do to help make India win and decided to take a walk. Most of my walks these days had ended up with me secretly watching the Temple Street Tankers practice. Coach Amir was bowling to the boys who had lined up by the nets. There were about 15 of them waiting for their turn, and I knew each and every one of them, their names, where they lived, and how much they had scored in their last maths exam. Some of their sisters went to my school, some of them lived on my street, and almost all of them took maths tuition with Appa. There was Bonda Balaji, my cousin and number one idiot. I watched him show off the new cricket bat his grandfather had bought him for his birthday. He was practically sticking it under the other boys' noses, and I could tell they were trying to ignore him. Most of them used the team kit. Ancient, taped-together bats, super gross thigh pads that were yellow and decaying and smelled of sweat, and threadbare leather balls that were more thread than leather. The Temple Street Tankers didn't have any money to buy new equipment, and most of the boys who played on the team didn't come from the kind of families that could spend money on new gear. But they all had no trouble paying for Girija aunties all year, all subject tuitions under one roof. Only Balaji regularly got his gear updated. His father, my Appa's cousin, had created some app that made translation super easy or something like that. I stood a little straighter when Suraj, the captain of the team, came up to bat. At 14, he was too old to play in the under-13 team, but he'd failed 7th standard twice and so he was still allowed to play. That's life for you. An overaged 7th standard fail can play for the cricket team if he's a boy, but a girl can't play even if she's 11 and the best right-hand batsman this side of Chidambaram Stadium. Sure, I'm the only one who knows that. But if I don't get a chance to play for the team, how will anyone else ever know it? So that's a little bit from the book.
Fabulous. I love it. I love it. I know this isn't pertinent to anything. Of course it is. Do you choose female characters when you write stories? Or it's not only in this book, it's Loki, because you're writing about cricket and how it's a male-dominated sport.
Right.
Still in India, yes.
Still in India. Yeah, I think, so I think this is a question my boys ask me a lot. They always want to know, but when are you going to write a story with a boy in it? This is really unfair. So I think I've promised them that whatever I write next will have boys as the main protagonist of the story. But I think somehow, I have written some picture books. In Lenin's Guests, for example, it's about a young boy and, the guests who turn up at his home. And what else? And I think I've written another book called I Spy a Lake, which has two friends, a boy and a girl, kind of playing I Spy by a polluted lake. So it is, but yeah, I think guilty as charged, I do tend towards wanting to tell stories about young girls, possibly more often than not. But like I said, it's also what suits the story and what the story that I'm trying to tell is. I think Loki, this particular story would have only worked with a female protagonist, I think. So that's where it comes from. But like I said, I've promised the boys. Next book, it's going to have boys in it. Lots of boys.
Sure. Menaka, you've written it so well as you were reading. I was looking at the choice of words, words paint pictures, right? So my next question is, since words have specific meanings, since one's choice of words affect feelings, a writer's choice of words can have great impact in a literary work. So do you pay heed to that when you're creating a book? What's important for you? I'm sure the story, but also the choice of words.
So I think you're absolutely right. As important as the story itself is and the narrative is and the story arc, it's also how you choose to tell the story. So I think when you're writing for very young, so I think here's the thing, right? Sometimes as writers, if you read a lot and if you're a voracious reader yourself and you have these writing literary heroes that you look up to and heroines that you look up to, you kind of feel like this need to be a little literary yourself. So you're always trying to see, well, how can I make this sound really literary and evocative and beautiful and things like that. But I think the important thing is that go ahead and do that if it is in the best interests of your story and if it serves your story and serves your reader. Don't do it otherwise. Don't do it just to show that you can do it, is what I'm saying. So I think with Loki, for example, as I started writing the story, I realized that it was not a story that needed or required literary embellishments in writing. Because it was this kind of, I wanted it to be a fast-paced, fun story. And I didn't want to have that pace kind of disrupted by a description of something that would not serve the story. So I think for me, I realized that in the case of Loki, I didn't need to do that. It wouldn't have helped. It wouldn't have benefited the story. The readers would have possibly been annoyed by an interruption to the pace of the story with the sudden kind of literary flourishes and things like that. So of course, as much as I desperately wanted to show that I could write like that, I think the important thing is to know why it works in some books, it works for some stories. It won't always work. I think there's a great, I'm trying to remember who said it, in one of these advertising copywriting gurus. I think it was, I can't remember who it was, but his advice was great. It was kill all your darlings. So just, so write your first draft, get it all out there, but then go back and be really ruthless. Kill all your darlings. So for me, that's something I try and keep in mind when I'm doing my own edits and when I'm revising and things like that. But I think choice of words, whichever words you choose to employ, they must be in service of your story. They must help you move your story forward, or they must tell the reader something about a character or something, or kind of, help build that world.
Yeah.
But don't just do it for the sake of doing it.
No. Because in storytelling as well, certain places you need to be descriptive, not just because you're using great literary words. So I agree with you. So your choice of words sometimes it's great. Like I came across somebody and so he says, a great army came out of this wish-fulfilling cow. So master charioteers from Greece, swordsmen from Cambodia, and horsemen from the steppes of Mongolia, and great archers from India. Here it is very pertinent because you're describing the kind of army that's coming out of this wish-fulfilling cow Nandini. Mm-hmm. This is a face-off between Vasishthar and Vishwamitra. So sometimes it's important, but not all the time. I agree with you. My last question to you, I'm not trying to put you on a spot. I have come across some of the Indian authors' literary works, which are, I would say, copy of books that I've come across in England or in the United States. And this rewriting of folk tales, what is it? To me, it's regurgitating. We also spoke about rewriting myths. Legends, like of course you have the erstwhile Rajagopalachari who wrote about Valmiki's Ramayana. Then you also have Ashya Sattar, who is written about Ramayana for children and who follows Valmiki's Ramayana. She follows that as a framework. What are your thoughts on today rewriting or redoing books and things like that? Yes.
So I think, folk tales and myths and epics are always popular. They're kind of, whereas with other kind of, you may have certain publishing trends come and go. After Harry Potter, we all had this kind of influx of books around magic and fantasy and all of that. But a constant kind of popular genre in children's books especially is always going to be folk tales and mythology and epics. So I think, so there is a constant kind of a demand for those kind of books, which is why that every year you will see a new kind of retelling of folk tales or a retelling of epics and mythology kind of come out into the market. I think for me personally, my own personal preference, I don't think that's the kind of book that I would be able to write. But having said that, there is a demand for it. Publishers, they do well. Parents and grandparents love buying those books for children in their family and for nieces and nephews and all of that. So I can see why that kind of the demand and that need for it is there. But I think as a writer, if you're going to do it, you really have to see what is it that you're bringing, what perspective are you bringing that's new and fresh to the story that all of us or many of us have already heard or read at some point of time in our lives. As if it's something that an aspiring author out there wants to do, then really ask yourself, am I bringing something new to this? Am I bringing a fresh take on this? Or am I just simply rewriting what is already there in my own way? I think that's what I'd ask people to do. I think having said that, at the same time, I think it's always lovely. You have some lovely anthologies that have come out recently of folk tales from different parts of the world, from different parts of the country. So if you really, as a curator of these stories, have managed to unearth something that you think children have not heard yet, or a story from Slovakia or from Assam or from Jharkhand or wherever it is, and you're able to then present to children and readers a new story, then I would say, yes, that's fantastic. But I think otherwise, I really think it's the time now for kind of, especially in India, I would love to see more contemporary, new stories, new fiction, new ideas kind of come out. That's my personal preference.
Thank you. Because I don't know if you've seen this, maybe it's for young adults. I don't know what you would put it under. The water stories that were brought out by Tulika, in which these were water stories from around the world. And my favorite was the one Amrita Patil has written about this Nigerian folktale about the day water decided to visit the house of the sun and the moon.
Yeah.
She has given a different perspective to the story. It's like a STEM story. It's talking a lot of science concepts here. And beautifully choice of words that she's used. And it's almost, she's illustrating the story with words. That was for me as a storyteller. So yes, some of them do work when you're rewriting a folk tale or something. I agree with you but a popular folk tale is again and again, a folk tale is a folk tale, right? It's something by word of mouth.
Yes.
And if you bring your perspective to it, it's fine. But if it's the same original story rewritten, I have certain misgivings to it.
I think you have to ask yourself, why are you doing this then? What's the purpose behind doing this at all?
Yes. So I could hear your dog barking and saying hello to me. So hello back to him or her. I recently started loving dogs the last 3 years. So this was amazing. Menaka, is there something that you would like to tell the writers, authors, storytellers out there? Remember, we spoke about this at the beginning of this shoot, and I've forgotten what it was. If you remember, would you like to...
So I think, so two things, if I can, and I'll be quick, I promise. I think if out there, if you're aspiring to be a writer for children and you want to write children's books in, whether it's a picture book or middle grade, young adult, short, whatever it is, I would say please read widely, read children's books, read the books in the genre that you want to write in. And that does two things. It kind of tells you what's already out there. So you possibly, there are only so many ideas in the world, right? So it tells you what's already out there. So that, you can see if your idea has already been done better by somebody else. And I think the other thing that it tells you when you read really, really good books for children, it helps you set bars for yourself. So please read. I've just met lots of people who say they want to write books for children, but don't read books for children themselves. So definitely read a lot of children's books if that's what you wish to do. And the other thing that I would really like to say is to parents who are possibly, listening to this. I get a lot of DMs on Instagram from parents who ask me things like, can you suggest a good book on, and I see this on lots of Facebook groups and things like that as well. Can you please suggest good books on manners for my child, or about yoga for my child? Or I just saw one this morning, books that help improve synonyms and antonyms. And I think in the last, maybe 5 to 8 years, there's been this real shift from the act of reading for pleasure to the act of reading as a form, as a way of kind of improving children or teaching children all the time. And I would really like to request parents to let reading be a pleasurable activity for your children. And they will learn a whole bunch of things from books without us having to specifically finding those books for them. So I'm just saying, let them read for pleasure. They will learn so much when they read widely and when they read what they want to read. Children already have such little choice in their lives. I think it's wonderful when we can give them the chance to choose what they read for pleasure in their free time. And I think when we do that, this whole question of how can I get my child to read more is automatically answered. So I think if you want your kids to be readers and read voraciously and widely, let them have choice in what they want to read.
Wonderfully stated, Menaka. I completely agree with you, because I remember growing up and my father was stationed in Jhansi, a small little town in Uttar Pradesh, where I think because we had a fantastic library in the school, and we would read. It's not only Enid Blyton, then slowly going on to Dana Girls, and how the reading, the language, and then all that happened because it was totally our choice. Our parents never told us, "Oh, don't read this.
Yeah.
Don't read this book." It became our choice. My sister would read Agatha Christie while I would read Perry Mason, because probably I like the racy thrillers. And so I think you should, and because of my, I think, early beginnings as a good reader, I think sometimes today I feel that has helped me with the choice of words. For me as a storyteller, that's very important. The kind of words that I use when I tell stories. The content is very important, and I do work on the words because one needs to work on it. It's not there. Very well said, Menaka. Any last thought before we sign off? It's been a pleasure to host you.
Thank you so much for having me, Usha. This was great fun. I would just say, children's books aren't just for children. I think parents and grown-ups can also, will also find a great deal of just fun and joy for themselves. So please do pick up a picture book or a young adult novel or anything that you feel like, and share it with your child, read it yourself, and have fun. And yes, please consider buying Loki Takes Guard, which is out and is on Amazon and Kindle and all of that. So that's all from me.
Yes, please, since this is a pre-recorded segment, so Menaka, on 4th, if you come on the Facebook page of Bharat FM, you can put down the details and where they can get the book. So it was a pleasure talking to you. Finally, I got to meet you virtually, and hopefully we'll meet in person soon. And what a pleasure. You've thrown such wonderful lights on what it is to be a children's author, because I'm also planning to write something. But now I got to go back to read all the Indian children's books that's in the market. And that is a very good suggestion, because you should know what's there, what's out there.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Now, I was just going to say that there's some really wonderful books for children being published in India today across, age groups, genres, and they're really, really fantastic books to add to home and school libraries. And I just think just kind of be able to provide our children with a wide range of books from across the world is a real privilege. And it's something that's really wonderful if we're able to do. So I do hope parents go out and look for some of these books.
Yes, my last question to you. Who are the children's publishers? I know Tulika, Karadi Tales. I know Pratham. Then I also know Tara Books.
That's right.
And like you said, the other publisher whom you, Duckbill. And who are there are many publishing houses that have come, boutique publishing houses. I've come across some on Instagram. How are these? Is there enough place for so many publishing houses to thrive? And what about the content? What are the kind of authors that they bring on board? I guess that's something a reader has to choose.
Absolutely. And I think most publishing houses in India today, like there are very few publishing houses that do books for across the age group. So for example, you'll have a Penguin Random House or a HarperCollins that will do picture books, middle grade, young adult, and do the whole kind of span of books. Tulika also does picture books and some middle grade and young adult fiction. Pratham Books, Eklavya are mostly focused on the picture book kind of category. Duckbill, again, from like more of an emergent reader and onwards. So really, they all have their own kind of segment of books that they produce and they put out. And they have their own kind of publishing ethos and what kind of books they'd like to produce and publish for children. So I think there's enough space. I think there are so many people out there who want to tell stories and who want to write stories for children. So I think if anything, the more publishing houses we have, the better. So there's more choice for the reader at the end of the day.
Absolutely. I agree with you totally, Menaka. As time is running out, one last question, because that's been preying on my mind. I asked Katie also last week. Has the pandemic helped you as a writer?
So, last year, the pandemic was probably the pandemic year was one of the busiest years I've had as a writer, because it was in March that Loki got accepted by Talking Cub. So I had my rewrites and my editing of Loki to do that year. I also I wrote the short story for the Intact anthology during the lockdown and during those months. And I actually also wrote a draft of a picture book, which Penguin is publishing later this year. So I had these three. I don't know if it was easy or not. I think, Usha, for me, it was a hard year because I had these 3 books that I was working on. I had my 2 assignments that I was doing. That's my day job, which I do during the day. And then, of course, we were all at home cooking and cleaning and doing the laundry and doing all of that as well. So when I look back at it, I was like, how did I survive? That was just so stressful. But, there are deadlines that you have to meet and that you want to meet, and you don't want to disappoint your editors. So I don't know how I did it, but it was, I think in a way, it was like I had my deadline. I always tell my editors, give me a deadline. Say, by this date, we would like to see this by you. That's when I work. Otherwise, I'm the queen of procrastinating. I'm like, there's months to go for this and all that. So, I think in my head, all I saw were my deadlines and me just working towards them. But it was exhausting, which is probably why I haven't started anything new yet, because I'm still recovering from last year.
Wonderful. Yeah, procrastination. I love that word. I procrastinate on certain things. Menaka, what did I want to ask you? I wanted to ask you because, this becomes never ending. When you say something, it goes on to the next question. Well, never mind, because I can't recall what I wanted to ask. But on this, that pandemic has been good for you. I'm so happy that you are. No, I wanted to ask you about your latest day job, maybe as a podcast company, what you're doing. So can you just give in 2 lines about it? I remember.
I work with an independent podcast production company in Bangalore called Vaka Media. And we make podcasts about a whole host of topics. We make podcasts about the development sector in India called In the Field. We make a podcast about women's experiences in the city called City of Women. And we've just done a fantastic new podcast mini-series called Founders, which is about women entrepreneurs in India. So with Vaka Media, my primary role is, again, digital communications and social media. So I look at the kind of content we put up on Instagram and Twitter. I help us build communities around our shows, and that's communities of listeners, and also sometimes communities of people who want to contribute their own stories to some of the podcasts that we make. So that's my day job, and it's great fun.
You do don many hats, Menaka. Hats off to you. And with that, we wrap up, friends. It's been a great, I would say, Storytellers Cafe with enough brewing there. And Menaka, it's been a pleasure to host you. I have to end our session with the ad of Bharat FM and then the jingle. So thank you once again for coming on to Storytellers Cafe. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Usha. Thanks so much.
Namaskar, Sat Sri Akal, welcome and adab. You are listening to Bharat FM, a one of its kind, multilingual, eclectic provider of entertainment, information, and news to Indian Americans. Headquartered in Cincinnati, Ohio, Bharat FM airs shows out of Cincinnati, Chicago, and Phoenix. We take pleasure in our ability to cater to your bhakti, chusti, sfurti, shakti, and masti needs with our audio and visual shows. Check out bharatfm.com for our online program schedule and archives. I'm sure the content will definitely tickle your senses. Tune in via the 24-hour web streaming on bharatfm.com or via the Bharat FM app. More information can be procured at 513-488-5070.
This is Bharat FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.
ये है भारत FM.
बजेगा भारत झूमेगा भारत.